In my example here, what will happen, regardless of who starts with how many permits, by the end of the day, firm C will have sold any permits that it has to firms A and B, because firm B, for example, would be willing to buy one permit for anything less than it costs them to cut their own pollution, which is $10 a ton. Firm C would be willing to sell any permits that it has for anything greater than the cost of cutting pollution, which is, of course, $5 a ton. So I can't tell you from this example, it's a little bit too simplified, exactly what the price of permits is going to be, but it will be somewhere between $5 and $10 per ton. And firm A and firm B will offer to firm C whatever it takes for them to give up those permits. They will never offer more than their own cost of cutting pollution. And what happens is you end up with firm C cutting all of its pollution, so it emits 0. Firms A and B cut none of their pollution. They each emit 3. We've met our overall target, but with C doing all the work, the compliance costs are much lower, $15 per ton. So this is a sort of a basic explanation of why market mechanisms are so popular with economists. Another version of this same idea is a carbon tax. Under a carbon tax, let's say that the government set the carbon tax at $9 per ton. Now, anybody who wants to pollute can pay $9 per ton of pollution. Anybody who doesn't want to pollute can do whatever they want to get their pollution down. But if you emit a ton of carbon, you're going to pay $9 for it. Again, firm C will decide that it's not worth the tax. It's cheaper for them to cut their pollution, so they will. For firms B and C, the cost of the tax is lower than their cost of cutting pollution, so they won't cut their pollution. Firm C will emit 0 tons of carbon. Firm A and B will emit 3 tons each. The total reduction will be 3 tons. Emission level will be 6 tons, just the target we were aiming at. And again, the compliance cost will be 15 because C is doing all the work. So a fundamental economic truism that a cap-and-trade system and a carbon tax, where the tax is set equal to or very near to the price that the cap-and-trade market settles at, will give you exactly the same amount of pollution at the exact same facilities and the exact same overall compliance costs. There is one difference. There's a footnote here next to my same as cap-and-trade message, and this is the biggest little footnote in all of environmental policy, all of probably any policy at the moment, which is how did we get those permits into the market in the first place? The government is restricting the ability in a cap-and-trade system of someone to pollute for free. It's creating scarcity where there was none. The right to pollute will therefore have value. The market will tell us what the price of those permits is and determine the value of the right to pollute. That's how the system works. We don't know exactly, because the Waxman-Markey bill is still a draft, we don't know exactly how much these permits are going to sell for once they hit the market. However, last year, there was a bill that made it fairly far through the Senate called the Lieberman-Warner Bill, America's Climate Security Act, if you were paying attention. And the EPA did an assessment of that bill and found that the value of the permits, the market cap of the permits, over the life of the legislation, which was until 2050, would have been somewhere between $5 and $10 trillion. The Waxman-Markey bill that's moving through the House right now, we think will probably cost somewhat less, but the value of the permits will certainly hit, the market cap of the stock of permits will hit something like $500 billion a year by the end of the 50-year life of this bill. Throughout the entire life, I would not be at all surprised if it exceeded several trillion as well. Probably not at the higher end of the Lieberman-Warner, not towards the 10 trillion range, but certainly as a high end, I think 5 trillion is not an unreasonable expectation. This is probably the largest amount of money that the government has ever moved in one action, probably since it gave away Oklahoma in the 1800s. That's why everybody's paying attention to this, obviously, very closely. At the moment, the Waxman-Markey bill is going through what we call regular order, which is sort of the standard process of getting things done. The subcommittee will have to decide. They'll give it to the full committee. The full committee will send it to the floor. If it passes the votes at all these levels, the Senate at some point will decide to take it up. They may take it up simultaneously. They may wait until the bill passes the full floor in the House, if it does. At the moment, The bill is silent on what it would do with the permits, whether it would give them away for free to emitters, whether it would sell them, and if it sells them, or it sells less than all of them, what it will do with the money. There's another economic truism here, is that, well, we know that putting a limit on carbon emissions will raise energy prices. The degree to which energy prices rise is independent of whether or not you give the permits away for free or if you sell them at auction. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive because there's sort of this assumption that if we give the permits away for free, we didn't charge business anything, they won't charge anything to their consumers. Like much of economics, what's intuitive is actually not quite right. And the reason is, I've been working on this for about 13 years. Hopefully I found an easy way to explain this to non-economists. Imagine going to the World Series without a ticket. And you go to the parking lot and you find a scalper willing to sell you a ticket. And he's going to sell this ticket to you for whatever the market will bear, however much you're willing to pay. And if you're not willing to pay as much as someone else, he'll sell it to someone else. That's the way scalpers operate. Now, I haven't tried to do this. I'm assuming that a ticket to the World Series in the parking lot 5 minutes before the game probably runs somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000. I could be wrong. But let's say that the market rate for this ticket is $1,000. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day whether the scalper found the ticket on the ground, whether he paid for it himself, or whether he had a friend in the box office steal it for him and sort of slip it out the back. He's still going to charge you whatever he can for that ticket. Permit markets operate the same way, and I honestly don't mean to impugn energy companies or ticket scalpers, frankly, by comparing them to one another. But the fact of the matter is that energy companies, anyone who emits, anyone who's in business, is in the business to make money. So imagine for a moment that we emitted 10 tons last year, and there were 10 polluters, 10 emitters, and we wanted to cut emissions to 9. So we line 10 people up against the wall, and we give the first 9 a free permit. Number 10 is sort of out of luck. Well, what does he do? He's got two options. Either he has to buy a permit from one of the other 9, in which case he's incurred some cost that he's going to try to recoup from his customers by raising his prices if he can. Or he's going to have to spend some money on cleaning up his emissions, either by using renewable energy, which is more expensive, installing some efficiency equipment, which is also expensive, in which case he's going to spend some money and try to pass that on to his consumers. If he can't do either of those things and remain profitable, well, he's probably going to have to shut down his operations. That's going to reduce the supply of the product, and when supply goes down, we know the price goes up. Now, the first 9 in the same industry as him, they're all going to see the same price for their commodity. Certainly something like energy, natural gas, oil, all of that stuff, coal, operates on a pretty standard commodity basis. Once they see the final price of their product go up, because that's what the market will bear, that's what they'll charge. So they'll be able to take advantage of this higher price without having to spend any money on reducing their emissions. They get to take advantage of the higher price. So if you give the permits away for free, you end up transferring wealth in what we call a lump sum fashion from energy consumers to energy producers. On the other hand, the government could choose to sell the permits and do something hopefully economically productive with the money. It could invest in energy efficiency. It could give the money to its campaign contributors. It could simply waste it, as we know the government is certainly capable of doing. But what the government does with these permits and what it does with the revenues from any permits that it sells will actually have a very large bearing on how much this costs altogether. The bill at this moment has not entirely, they're dribbling details out at us now, at what they're going to do with these allocations. When they announced this bill, they left this enormous hole in the middle of it because they knew they needed this as a bargaining chip. So right now, and I would say right now, I mean literally, at this very moment on Capitol Hill, they're in negotiations with utility companies, with some environmental groups, with representatives of various regions, various people who control swing votes on the appropriate committees, are all negotiating right now where these permits are going to go, whether they'll be sold or given away, and what they're going to do with the money from any permits that they decide to auction.